All right. So I wanted to go over a few of typography rules as we move into our next project. I think just some of this is going to be refresher for some of us, and some of it'll be new for some of us, depending on, what classes you've had before. So when we think about typography, the number one rule for typography is typography exists to honor content. So it's important to think about the typography, the type choices you make. So for example, here's some examples of different typefaces. So the idea of traditional, modern, royal, elegant, medieval, futuristic, rugged, or friendly type. So you want to think about when you're choosing typefaces, you really want to go through not just what's on your computer, but you want to go through Adobe fonts and really type in some keywords to find typefaces that are going to be the right typefaces for your design, that are going to help communicate the message that the read, what we're reading is all about. We want to make sure that we have legibility, but we also want to make sure that you're honoring the content. You also want to make sure, as we just talked about in our last project, that we're reading all the content, and we're really looking at, are we reading the content? Are we pulling out the important bits of information? That's going to be really important as we move into the next assignment, where we're going to be reading the content and really kind of paying attention to what are the key things that are important. Point size. 10 point to 12 point is the most effective for body copy in printed documents. We're going to be working with all semester on printed documents. And so we really want to think about the size of our titles and headings, which can be larger and vary depending on the needs of our design. But the headings and the body should have a minimum of 2 points difference. You want to make sure that there's hierarchy within the different weights and sizes of the type that you're using on any given page. But you want to think about what makes sense for the body text and what makes sense for the body headings. Leading. And as we're going along, if anyone has any questions, I can't always see, oh, here we are. Let me put your, let me know if you, by raising your digital hand or turning your microphone on, if you have a question as we're going along. If I'm going too fast, or if you want to talk more about any one of these subjects. Leading is the space between lines, and we measure it from baseline to baseline. The leading should be 120 to 140% of the point size. So, example, if you have 12-point letters, you should have a leading of at least 14.4, which is 120% of the point size. I prefer to use, rather than a percentage, I prefer to use points. And so if you have 12-point letters, I would say 15 point is the leading, which would be 3 points larger, which would get us over 120%, because a 14.4 is 120%. I like to go a little more open, and I like it to be 3 full points. Auto leading, that is automatically calculating for you in your Adobe programs, will automatically calculate a point size of 120%. In my mind, a lot of times that's a little too tight, so I like to go 3 points. But you should never go less. Let's just put that as a baseline. You should never go less than 120 points, okay? I mean 120%, or 140%, gosh, goodness. 120 is the minimum, and the 140 is their max. So 120 is that auto size. Tracking is what we call character spacing, and that's the spacing between all the characters. a tracking of plus 20, which is positive tracking, to negative tracking is the best range for readability. Who can tell me, where do we use tracking when we're working with our type on a page layout? What would make us even adjust the tracking?
To avoid orphans or widows.
That's right. To avoid orphans or widows, we're going to adjust the tracking of 1 or 2 sentences so that we can move a word up a line or move more words down. So we avoid those orphans or widows. What's another reason to mess with tracking? Any other ideas? What about hyphenations? What if we have multiple hyphenations in a row? What should we do?
Are you talking about at like the end of a sentence, like the end of a line?
End of a line, not the end of a sentence. Yeah.
At the end of a line, you just like enter or backspace.
No, that's not what you want to do. You want to add tracking.
Oh,
Tracking. We're talking about tracking. So if you have hyphenations, multiple hyphenations at the end of your line, and you feel like there's only 2 letters that are returning to the next line, you can take that sentence and minus the tracking up to minus 20 to get that word all on one line and avoid the hyphenation. Tracking, never a hard return. You do not want to hit enter. That gives you a hard return, and that can cause you problems down the road. Okay, so you want to remember tracking is your friend, but remember, you don't really want to go much more than 20 plus 20 or minus 20, because letters can be too close and or too spaced, and then it's harder to read. Okay, the cousin to tracking is kerning. Kerning is the space between individual letters. Setting kerning to optical will space best for readability. And basically, optical is what it should automatically be doing. Manual adjusting should only be required for titles or as a stylistic choice. So really the only time we're dealing with kerning isn't ever in body copy. It's almost always in a headline or a body or a subhead that has a big type on the page. We want to avoid letters clashing. We don't want to have letters just merging into each other. We want to make sure that there's a good amount of space optically between letters so they read comfortably. Okay, now paragraph alignment is our next subject. Body text is best read when left aligned. Center aligned can be applied to titles and small groups of text, and right aligned for footers and notes. So for example, in this blue box here, you'll see there's center aligned title, but the body copy is flush left. And then you'll see over here, reg text, the headline is flush left. The body copy is flush left, which has a rag edge, and this little yellow line is indicating that ragged edge. It's not a big deal for small groups of text when left aligned, just depends on the aesthetic you're looking for. When there's a strong vertical line to the right of your text, it may be better to justify your text. So there's a strong yellow line on the edge. So when you have a strong element like this, you might want to try justified text. Juxtaposition pulls text to the edge of a frame to create clean edges of text. You don't want to use justify all, always last line left, right, or center. Justify all may cause rivers. And this is what I mean. Here you have justify text and you see the yellow line indicating it's a sharp edge. It's not ragged. And it's last line left. This last line ends to the left. If you don't click left justified last line, this is what you get. The whole type evenly spaces so that it can fit the full lines edge to edge. And what you get, look at the difference of how more open the tracking is. And then where these yellow lines are showing rivers running through the text. So you want to avoid rivers and you want to avoid justifying all the text when you use justification. Always that last line should be last line left is what you want. And the last practical type rule I want to share with you is line length. And it's the width of a line of text. So line length for body of text should on average consist of 45 to 85 characters in width. So including the spaces. So here's an example of counting characters, including the spaces for the whole line of text. The average should be 45 to 85 characters in width. So another way to think of line length is keeping between 9 and 13 words. Line lengths, either too short or too long, disrupt the process of reading. So you really want to pay attention to how long your characters are, how many characters you have in a row. And it's really because our brain struggles when the lines get too long. We lose track of where we are and we keep rereading the same lines. So it just makes it difficult to read type that isn't too long of a paragraph width. All right, and that's the end of my short little kind of type rules to think about as we move on and move into more typed layout. Any questions?